good evening, and God evening to all of you. Welcome to WCEG Network, the most empowering network that you will ever find across this nation, across this world. I am the host, Joe Flint of the People's Choice here on WCEG Network. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, follow us on LinkedIn, and everywhere you are, that's where WCEG is. And I am again your host, Joe Flint of the People's Choice, and I'm delighted this evening to have with us two very special guests to discuss some extremely important matters that are facing our communities and our nation as a whole, but even on a global level. I'm blessed this evening to have with us Dr. Stephanie Myers, who is the co-chair, and I want to make sure I'm saying this right, of the Black Women for Positive Change Foundation or organization. And she is also the vice president of the R.J. Myers Publishing and Consulting Company. So if you need a book published, this is who you need to call because she knows exactly what to do. In addition to Dr. Myers, I have with us Dr. Valree on the line, who in her own right is a very astute professor, and for the past 25 years as a conflict resolution practitioner. And Lord knows we could use some conflict resolution in all that we're dealing with on the basis of this world that we live in. Ladies, thank you so very much and welcome to the People's Choice here on WCEG Talk Radio.
Thank you, Reverend Flint. Our pleasure to be here.
Thank you so very much to talk to you. Dr. Myers, it's good to see you again. It's been, I think, a year since last we spoke. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come back on here and talk with us about what your organization is doing. So please give us a rundown real quickly about what is happening with Black Women for Positive Change.
Well, we are getting ready to have the 12th annual month of nonviolence, families, voters' rights, and opportunities, October 1st to the 31st. Okay. And we started off doing a day back in 2012, then it went to a week, and now we're at a month, and it's nationwide, it's even worldwide, where we have 5 other nations involved in this effort this year. Right. But one thing we must realize, Reverend Flint, violence begins at the kitchen table. Violence really starts for most people at home. They're learning from their parents, their brothers, their neighbors, the people that they have right in their immediate family. We have verbal violence, physical violence, guns. So what we're trying to do is to make people aware we must change the culture of violence. And there's a culture that goes all the way back to when America was founded. We know that the genocide against Native Americans, the enslavement of our ancestors coming here in bondage, and even the white indentures who came, it was a violent culture, and it still is. You could turn on television any night and watch shooting after shooting, killing after killing. So the violent culture has to change. So our month of nonviolence is designed to promote awareness, get people to start thinking. It's got to be more than just law enforcement and throwing people in jail. We have got to stop it and prevent violence before it begins. So that's our overall goal and what we're working toward. And Black Women for Positive Change has men who are full members. We'd love to pull you in, Reverend Flint. We have an awesome group of men who work with us. We have millennials, Gen Zs, and right on down to the Alpha generation, ages 5 to 12. So we're really trying to be intergenerational, men and women, and multicultural. We have people in Black Women for Positive Change who are not Black. And we are also interfaith with Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and Hindus, and Buddhists. So that's what America is. And we have to accept that, we have to embrace it, and we have to improve on it.
I love it. Let me ask this question before I get Dr. Valree in on this. Over the past, I think this would be 12 years, you said. Over the past 12 years, what have you seen as an outcome for what has transpired with your months of nonviolence?
Well, that's a great question because it's really difficult to be right about something that is so painful and so brutal. We have found that in 2012, most people didn't want to talk about this. Right. It was kind of violence. I mean, come on, what are you talking about? Why would you go into such an ugly area? What's wrong with you? Kind of thing. I
Right.
even had a minister tell me once, I'm not going to bring this up in my church. Are you kidding? He said, half of the people in my church either commit domestic violence or are victims of domestic violence. He
My
said, if
Lord.
I bring this up in church, I'll lose my congregation.
My Lord.
Well, things have moved along now, and people can see, largely as a result of the video cameras, the telephones actually captured
Oh,
everything. You
oh yeah.
can't deny it. So the denial that we saw in 2012 is really disappearing. And now we are seeing people say in 2023, okay, we've got to stop this. We've got to change this because this is much too dangerous to keep going forward. So that's been a big part of what we've learned. One other thing we've learned is from the young people. The young people have told us they don't want to be lectured to about, how to act when the police pulls them over. They don't want to be lectured to. What they want are dreams and opportunities. And I had a young man tell me once at an event, your generation has failed to give us dreams. You're so busy. You're going to work all day. You're on the phone. You're on the computer. You don't have time for us. We have no dreams. So that's why we're violent, because we're angry, we're disappointed, we're frustrated. So we have to address that also. How do we bring inspiration and light and dreams and hope into the lives of our young people?
Wow. Wow. That's eye-opening to hear a young person say that we have robbed them of their ability to dream. Wow.
Well, he blew us away. I mean, we were at a high school, about 300 young people in the auditorium, and I was sitting next to the police chief of Pittsburgh. And this young man who was 16 years old, that's what he said. And he was very, very clear in his message. And
Wow.
it really was very upsetting to hear that. But it was true. We have to face the truth.
Part of the problem with our generation, and I'm in my 40s and those above, is that we sometimes are too close to the mirror to see exactly what is transpiring. So Dr. Valree, again, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that you are the best professor at Cal State that they have to offer. I want to know from your perspective about mediation. And I know mediation. I've heard, of course, of it all of my life, but one specific area in which I remember it, and unfortunately, quite a few people can probably attest to this as well, is when I was going through my own divorce, and there was mediation that had to take place there. Lord knows it was needed. So I know that it is a real thing, but I've never considered it beyond that scope. I've never thought about it on a level of just conflict resolution, on the level of mending families, mending companies, and all these areas. So how has your role as a professor in conflict resolution helped to shape the young people that you are teaching?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that mediation has 3 different approaches.
Okay.
As you just said, in a family law setting where you're going through a divorce or there's child custody,
Right.
that is what's called a very directive approach, where the mediator talks to the parents. It's the parents both sides, but the mediator ultimately has the decision-making power to go back to the judge and say, I think based upon talking to both parents, mom should get custody or dad should get custody, or they should split custody. That's
Right.
one approach. The other approach is what we call more of an administrative hearing. So, for example, in your housing departments, where there's a dispute between a landlord and a tenant, they may go in front of a hearing officer.
Right.
The hearing officer, unlike in a family law court, does not have the final decision. They make a recommendation, and then that recommendation goes to their superior. Now, the mediation world I live in is community mediation, and community mediation is the largest practice of mediation because it involves everything that's community, from businesses to families to organizations to schools. And so with that type of practice, we like to focus on facilitation, talking to people. As mediators, we don't tell the parties what they should do. We don't make decisions for you.
Right.
We don't suggest what you should do. What we do is empower you to make the decision for yourself.
Right.
And the one thing I like about it is that at the end of the day, whatever people decide, it's something that works best for them personally. And so when people get upset and, in courts, divorces or whatever, somebody's always unhappy.
Of
They
course.
get what they want. But when you approach mediation where people are talking to each other for understanding and letting them work through those emotions, we have such a higher percentage of success rate, because the emotional part that you don't get to talk about in court, you don't get to talk about it in a hearing, you get to talk about it in a community setting, in a facilitative approach. When people can work through their emotions, they can come up with a resolution that meets their interests. And that's what makes the difference. So there's three different approaches.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Valree, and I'm sure you probably have tons of stories, but how would you say, based on the fact that you said community is where your focus is, what would you say is probably one of the most successful community mediations that you've been able to conduct? Success may be relative, but what would you say is one that was probably the most powerful one that you were able to conduct?
I would say, and this one it was a real estate transaction, and one of the parties was a veteran. He had just come home. His wife was expecting their first child. They had purchased a home, and there were some foundational issues with the home. And the husband just sort of accompanied the wife because she scheduled the mediation, and he was ready to resolve it. And husband decided, let me just go check with this attorney I know. Can I have a break? Which you have to allow them to have. If they want to consult with counsel, you give them that opportunity. So he comes back in and he says, my attorney says we could get, 6 figures for this. Why should we come to mediation? We can go to court. I said, there's a possibility you could.
Right.
I said, but can your attorney put in writing and guarantee you that you're going to get that 6 figures?
Right.
And that is going to satisfy the interest, because the interest from your wife's perspective is she's getting ready to have a baby and she wants a home.
Right.
Now you think about going to court, you know how long those delays are? Did your attorney explain that they're going to bill you for every time they have to do A, B, or C? And at the end, there's a 33 1/3% that they're going to take out of that 6 figure, whatever he promised.
Yes.
And I don't think the attorney really clarified all of that. So they went out, they consulted, he came back in, and everything that the wife wanted in terms of repairs, getting relocated, when they would be able to move back into their home, they got everything in addition to $25,000 cash.
Fantastic. So ladies, together, tell me how is Black Women for Positive Change and Dr. Valree's mediation, how did these two mesh? How did we come together as one?
Well, we were working with one of our partners, which is a national community organization that works with mediation. And we met Dr. Valree that way. And as we've had these years of nonviolence and these months of nonviolence, this year they began to talk to us about peace circles. Now, Dr. Valree has done youth summits in the past at Dominguez Hills, and she's been a part of the activities. We asked different groups, faith leaders, schools to host events, either online or face-to-face. But they started to talk about the peace circles, and we became fascinated with what are these? And the more they explained to us the way that it's a communications tool and how it grows out of the indigenous cultures of Africa and in America with the Native Americans and some parts of Asia, we became fascinated. So they then talked about having peace circles in the schools. And so far, I believe we're up to 45 peace circles that are organized to be in schools. There may even be more across the country. And I learned today that the city of Pittsburgh is going to have 10 peace circles right there in that one city. So the kids will be sitting down and having mediation and facilitation about what's on their minds. and what kind of conflict and anger they might be experiencing.
Dr. Myers, can you, for the sake of our audience, explain more what the Peace Circle is?
Okay, well, Dr. Valree will be the one to really go into detail on
Okay.
that, because she's kind of the leader with it. So
Gotcha.
Dr. Valree, you go ahead and explain what the Peace Circle
Please,
is.
Dr. Valree, please.
So a Peace Circle is a communication tool where you bring youth together and they get to sit in this structured, and they're in a circle because a circle represents equity, which is what we want them to understand. It's a way for them to engage in respectful conversation. And that conversation can be about, for example, one student may have an issue about homework, or one student may have an issue with a conflict with another student, but they create this space for students to feel comfortable, to be able to be honest. And one of the beauties of Peace Circles is that it enables youth to feel comfortable to talk about very difficult issues. I think you said it earlier, sometimes we as adults get too close to the mirror and we don't have the same experiences our youth have.
Right.
And sometimes we don't listen as adults. Don't listen.
I'm guilty. My children tell me sometimes I don't listen. Yeah.
My daughter tells me that quite often too.
And see, the beauty of this is anyone who's listening to this program can sign up to do this type of work. They can go to www.monthofnonviolence.org, monthofnonviolence.org, and sign up, even if they want to learn how to do it and they don't know how. The organization, the National Association for Community Mediation, has experts all over the country. They have 300 chapters, and there may be someone right in their community that they can connect with who can help them learn how to do it. So we really encourage people to sign up. And Dr. Valree and her colleague, Kimberly Best, wrote up a manual, a toolkit, a free toolkit that people who are interested in learning about this can receive off of our website. Now, this is a tremendous game. They don't have to go to Barnes and Noble bookstore. Out of the passion and the commitment that Dr. Valree and her colleagues have, we have this incredible toolkit that spells it out. So it's time for everybody to get up off the couch and get serious. If they have a Peace Circle in the backyard with their own kids or grandkids, the neighbors next door, people at the church, there's no excuse for not being able to do this and have a discussion and a dialogue.
Dr. Myers, you mentioned a little while ago about, when you came into this focus of nonviolence, there was a pastor who was not willing to go into this conversation, which made me wonder, do you get a lot of resistance from I guess the better question is, where do you find the greatest resistance in dealing with this type of subject?
Well, I think we find it in society groups that don't want to have the taint of violence put into their world. We find it sometimes among business organizations, because business organizations feel that the concept of talking about violence can damage their product or somehow chase customers away from what it is they're doing. So we have run into that. We have found good support from the faith community and not good support. We have a lot of denial where some of the faith leaders just don't feel it's their responsibility to have to take this on. So there's been some resistance there. But overall, we're finding that people are growing and learning. And when they do, then they get very excited when they can work with a family who's experienced violence and then help someone to avoid it. We learned about the issue of de-escalation, for example.
Okay.
And the whole concept of learning how to de-escalate violence is so powerful that when a person can learn how to communicate with the person who's angry. So instead of screaming at them, if you have someone who's upset and they're yelling and screaming, if you're in that particular environment, they call it bystander intervention. You might be able to get the person's attention off of what he's angry about and onto something else. And you might save a life doing that. So there are techniques Many of these techniques have been perfected in mental institutions, in the psych ward, where the person who's angry and violent in the psychiatric ward, the doctors and the nurses have to learn tone of voice, body language, how to stand back, how to distract them. And so now we're transferring that kind of knowledge out into the community. Police officers are taught de-escalation, but they need to learn a lot more on it, that's for sure. But we want teachers, parents, faith leaders, community leaders, and Congresswoman Gwen Moore has drafted legislation on this subject, the National Community De-Escalation Training Act, and she'll be reintroducing it next month. So there will be $500 million coming into communities to train people in how to do de-escalation. And for professors like Dr. Valree, they'll really be able to use these resources to help people. We want to change the culture, and this is how we do this. When you get mad, you don't go get a gun and shoot somebody.
Right.
You know, you go to a mediator and say, I want to work this out.
Right. You know, it's amazing to me as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about the fact that this is a very viable resource. And yet I am sure that there are a lot of people who are still not aware that they can use this type of tool in order to resolve just everyday issues. How has, there is a, and I may not be quoting this right, it's Stamp Out, I'm trying to think of the name of it, Stamp Out the Stigma. And it wasn't, I don't know that it was the name of the organization, but at one point when I was working for a corporate company, there was a group that came in to stamp out the stigma of people who have depression or who go through anxiety issues and so on and so forth. And I think what brought that to my mind is kind of what you were talking about, Dr. Myers, the pushback. A lot of times in our community specifically, if you know, we say growing up Black, a lot of times we heard the statement, what happens in my house stays in my house. And so we would not hear these types of conversations about conflict resolution. The conflict resolution was if mama said it, that was the answer. Or if daddy said it, that was the answer. And Dr. Valree, do you find that you have a lot of that? I know you said you're community-based, but prior to community-based, when you were doing this, I guess, if you did this in a family setting, or if you've had any experience in this, do you still see a lot of that?
There's a lot of resistance to problem solving, period. You know, once people's emotions get attached to whatever, particularly in families, it's really hard. So I'll give you an example. One of the big sort of growing areas of conflict resolution and mediation is elder care. So you have children who are trying to decide, you know, what's the appropriate care for our parents. You bring them together, they're willing to come and sit down and talk about, you know, what their parents need. But once they start talking, then it goes back to childhood. Well, mom loved you more. And you're the oldest, so you always told me what to do. And so part of the beauty of, and that's why I like community, is that you let them talk through those emotions. Well, why do you think that? When did this happen? And let them get all of that sort of hurt out, because that's what anger is. It's pent up emotion. And what we try and do with community mediation and facilitative and transformative practices is to get people, whether they're youth, whether they're adults, to talk through the emotion, release the emotion. I tell my students, every class, do not cut a person off. If they are angry, let that anger be released in that session where you have some control over how the parties engage. If you don't let them work through their emotion, whatever that is, they're never going to get to a place to be civil. And there's never going to be peace, and there's never going to be healing.
You know, I just recently started a new series at my church. It's entitled, well, I borrowed this from another pastor, just in case he's listening. I want to make sure I give credit to it. But at the Baptist Convention recently, I was able to sit in on several sessions. And one was a lecture, and Pastor Rhodes mentioned the statement of healing while leading. What I have discovered, even in my role as a pastor, but in just my leadership roles that I've had in life, a lot of leaders are facing so many different challenges and have not themselves healed from the things that they've dealt with. And now they are in charge of or leading other people. And what was expressed is that we're bleeding on everybody else because we are not healed from the things that we endure. And what I've discovered is that in the examples that we're talking about, these things even bring on grief. Violence in a home for a child growing up, or for a husband or a wife who has been, dealing with violence, don't realize it, but that is a form of grief that they have taken on, and they are living this every single day of their lives. And unfortunately, they have not considered mediation. They have not considered counseling. They have not considered anything that will help them to heal. And so when you talk about a community-based mediation, I can just only imagine how helpful that can be for someone who is still afraid to talk about their issues or what has happened. But to be in that circle, to be in that, is it Circle of Peace? I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm saying it right. Peace Circle. I can't think of the name of the movie, Meet the Fockers. He calls it the Circle of something. I think he may say the same thing, Circle of Peace. But I can imagine that in those settings, in those circles, even the ones that are not speaking are finding the courage or are getting some healing and not even opening up about it. Are there any examples, Dr. Myers or Dr. Valree, where someone has come to you in some of the nonviolent settings, or Dr. Valree in some of the peace circles, and said that this helped me more than you know? I may not have said anything, but this has been great for me.
Well, Dr. Valree, I'm sure she has a response, but I'll just jump in here. Yes, we have domestic violence workshops during the month of nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
It does exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
We had a young lady on last year who talked about growing up in her home, and her dad was a minister. And he was the perpetrator of violence in the home. And she talked about being a little girl hiding in the closet when her dad would come home, because she could hear from his tone of voice whether he was angry or not that night.
Wow.
And she talked about being on the domestic violence panel, hearing what other people had gone through, made her more willing to talk about it and come to grips with it, because it was something she had hidden from everyone all these years. And now that she was married, she was afraid she was going to, not be fair with her children if she didn't learn how to deal with this. So yes, we have had some examples, and I'm sure Dr. Valree has.
Oh, certainly. We did a series of peace circles, but this was with adults. And if you could just have been there to see the tears, the emotion that just sort of came out as stories were being shared, and then having folks say, I've never felt comfortable or safe enough to have this conversation.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the peace circles, especially for children, and I want to focus back on our youth, is that they have a chance to heal. People don't understand the power of stories. As adults, we call them testimonies. Okay? Right. Well, for children, they're stories. So when they can hear these stories in this safe space where they're not judged, where they've created what we call conversation agreements and how they're going to engage in a circle, and they can talk freely and know that it's going to be maintained in a level of confidence, then you're going to get the truth. You're going to get healing. You're going to get tears. Yes, there's going to be anger that surfaces. There's going to be stories of trauma, pain, but that's what they need to start healing, because when you hold all of that stuff in, just as Dr. Myers said, just as you said, when you hold all of that in, we carry that forever. And at some point, it has to surface.
Let's come out.
To surface. So we want to create these safe spaces for our youth to be able to talk about those things. And peace circles are used in a myriad of ways. I don't think people realize that some teachers use peace circles as check-in circles in the morning. There's an assumption that when a child gets to school and maybe they're tired and their head is down on the desk, And if you don't check in with them, if you don't ask them, what happened? Did you not get enough sleep? Are you hungry? What? There's an assumption, oh, well, that child doesn't want to do their work. That may not be it. But if you use maybe the first 15 minutes of class to check in, create that circle, that safe space, then the teacher can be not only more engaged and build trust and rapport with the student builds trust and rapport with the teacher, but then can say, you know what, Dr. Myers, I couldn't sleep, there was gunshots, at my house, or there was arguing. It's not that I don't want to do my work, I'm just tired.
Right. And that is the unfortunate truth is that is an everyday story taking place in our schools, and children don't have that caveat. They don't have that ability to express those things. Dr. Myers, here in Georgia specifically, is there a chapter for Black women for positive change?
Not right now. Right now. We do not have a strong chapter, and we need to have one because Georgia is so critical to Black America.
Yes.
So we had a couple of ladies there, but they moved out and they moved to other parts of the country. So we would very much like to reach out and establish something in Georgia.
Wow.
It would be very, very important. As I mentioned to you, we're reaching across the world also.
Right.
October 2nd, and people can go on our website, monthofnonviolence.org, and see the calendar of events. Everything's going to be free, and we're going to have a session on building a global culture of peace. And that's going to be very interesting because we have a man from Kenya who's an elected representative who's going to talk about caravans that they're running in Kenya among the villages to try to spread the message of peace and love and that sort of thing. We have another man, Reverend Gerald Durley. Now, he is from Atlanta.
Everybody knows Dr. Durley. Everybody knows Dr. Durley.
Well, we just met Dr. Durley 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
So we're very excited because he's going to be on the global panel.
Now, Dr. Myers, let me tell you, you got somebody there. Dr. Durley he is, I can't say enough about him. He's a fantastic person. So you will be very pleased.
Well, very good. And if you'd like to have him come on and talk about this building a global culture of peace, Dr. Durley is going to be in Washington the end of the month for an international gathering of people who are going to be down on the mall, and 400,000 people have already signed up.
Wow.
And he's on the program. He'll be doing some of the speaking. So we're really honored to have him on this panel.
Next to Joe Flint, you got the best one. I'm kidding. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. No, he's fantastic. He's fantastic. Dr. Myers, if you'll tell us a little more about this. So, and I say this jokingly, but this is a very serious thing. In all of my years of life, I have sometimes watched I don't know if it's Miss America, Miss USA, or whatever, pageant, but you hear that statement all the time. I want world peace. How do you think that we can really establish or gain this in our lifetime?
That's a great question. Well, movies go worldwide. Mm-hmm. Music and popular songs go worldwide. Mm-hmm. Entertainers like Beyonce and different entertainers have world tours. There is a certain cultural level, particularly among people of color, where we respond to the messages in music and poetry and dance and art and in faith and religion. I believe we need to make a greater use of some of those tools. Not everyone's going to sit down with the book. Not everyone's prepared and feel secure to engage in an intellectual discussion. So we have to find ways to use some of the indigenous tools that people used to have. We know coming together around food is peaceful in many instances. So as we talk with our brothers and sisters in Kenya, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, South Korea, even Scotland, we're going to be asking them, how do you build a culture of peace? And they want to hear from some of the Gen Zs also. And I'll be talking to Dr. Valree about that, because we want to identify a couple of Gen Zs who can come on and ask some questions of the global leaders. Well, what do they see? What do the Gen Zs see? So we really have to be willing to listen, as you said earlier, How can we do that? We produced 2 movies with Black Women for Positive Change, and your listening audience can go on our website at blackwomenforpositivechange.org, and at the top of the page, they'll see a link to media. They can click on media, and then they can get a movie that they can show to their own kids, their high school kids, their neighbors. The first movie we did was called On Second Thought. We told about a real story that I read about in a Boston newspaper. It was a love triangle. One guy who was a basketball player got 2 girls pregnant. One girl got jealous and angry about the other girl, and she met her at a park one day and killed her. This is a true story. And the girl who committed the murder is still in prison. Her child's in foster care. I mean, it was horrible. So then we stop the movie and we say, now what would have happened if you had had a second thought? And we take the movie back to the beginning, and instead of getting the gun out of her mother's dresser, she calls her father. And she says, Daddy, I'm all upset. This guy's messing with me. He's gaming me. This chick is taking advantage of him. Da, 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 da. And the father says to her, baby, if you go and hurt her, you'll spend the rest of your life in jail. And the father talked her down. So we believe in this concept of having a second thought.
Yes.
I encourage you to look at the film. It's about 25 minutes long. The best part of that movie is the conversation that the young people have afterwards. It really is. They really get the message. There's a second movie up there called Drop, A Story of Triumph. And it's a similar theme where a young man gets all involved in drug deals, drops out of school, everything's a big mess, and he's on his way to jail. What would have happened if he'd had a second thought?
Right.
And at the second part of the movie, we have him making movies himself and becoming honored as a filmmaker.
Wow.
So we have to use these tools: film, video games, animation, music, poetry. These are the things that our young people like. These are the kinds of dreams that they want to have. Artificial intelligence. How can we make positive use of that? One of our representatives, Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds, who wrote the biography of Mrs. Coretta Scott King. She is one of our leaders. She's our chaplain. She's putting together a workshop during October on artificial intelligence. What is the ethical side of it? How can we put ethics into it? You know, just because you know how to do artificial intelligence, should you do all that it can do? What's the right way? What's the wrong way?
Right.
So these are the kind of subjects that we'll be raising during the month. And people are welcome to participate and do their own analysis of how this can work.
Amazing, amazing. Dr. Valree, I want to know, as a professor there at Cal State, and forgive my ignorance, but what would be, as you are teaching class, what is the title of a course or a class that you teach?
I teach several. So I teach restorative justice, which is the type of mediation process that's used primarily with youth. First-time offenders, they've done something wrong. You really don't want them to carry the stigma of going to jail when you can go back and address the harm. Hold them accountable for what they've done and have them sit face to face with the person that they've harmed. And again, try and have a conversation. It's also the emphasis for the youth is that all of us have made a mistake. All of us.
Right.
No youth should have a jail sentence for a first-time mistake. Right. Let's look at some other options. We all understand that our traditional system is flawed. And so let's look at alternatives. I hear people argue day in, day out, oh, if this person robbed the store, they should go to jail. Right. Well, if they didn't have any prior history, can we not give them a second chance?
Mm-hmm. And what was the reason they robbed the store? Did they do this because they didn't have, for instance, if it was groceries, did they take it because they didn't have food? Mm-hmm. For clothing, did they take it because they didn't have anything to wear?
And you don't think about that. Nobody's like you. Nobody's going to stop and ask that question.
Right. And I mean, as you were saying that, I started to think about, not that I would co-sign it, but just thinking about how sometimes, and being honest, that sometimes children are very cruel amongst each other. And so, thinking about in school, how if I'm wearing the same thing every day and I'm getting talked about, then guess what? Not that it's the ideal thing to do, but I'm going to go and try to find something else so that I won't be bullied or talked about in this matter, which unfortunately will sometimes lead to, stealing something different to wear so that nobody can talk about me. But please continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's fine, because, one good example I can share is a young man. He was, I think, 14, 15 years old, and he had a brother who was like 7 or 8. Mom was addicted to cocaine. She left the kids in the house for days. There was nothing to eat. And so finally, the older brother just went to the store, and he only took 2 items, a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, just to give his brother something to eat. And of course, he got arrested. His brother was, placed in the system, which you never want to see any child separated from all the family they have. But those are the types of circumstances where we can show grace.
Yes.
And show forgiveness. But first, we have to ask the question,
right.
Why did you do it?
Why?
You can't ask that question if you don't sit down and have a conversation.
Yes. How big, and both of you can answer this question, how big does the faith community, how big of a role does the faith community play in this? And do you find that the participation from the faith-based side is helpful? As well as the psychological side?
Absolutely. The faith leaders in our group, like I mentioned, Reverend Reynolds, who's our chaplain. We have men in our organization who are pastors. They'll be having an event in Washington on October 21st called the Difference Makers Summit. And they're going to be talking about the role of fatherhood in stopping violence. And what can dads do as mentors for sons that are their biological sons or not? So yes, the faith leaders are critical. One of our leaders is Imam Talib Sharif. He is a Muslim leader here in Washington. And he's trying to work with us to develop opportunities for the young people. So they have a dream, something that they can think that they can do. But we have some outstanding faith leaders who really are dedicated. Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who is the rabbi of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. He is one of the gentlemen who works with our organization. And we were so proud that he was down at the March on Washington and was a part of that. And you talked earlier, Reverend Flint, about how people suffer from the trauma of going through all of these horrible events. And Rabbi Myers is certainly an example of that because of all the people that were killed right in front of him at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. But he continues on, and he's just amazing. He hasn't missed a beat in how he's going. So we have to learn from people like him, people who have seen the tragedies up front, and the faith leaders, of course, teaching the word of God, the word of Christ, the word of their belief system. They're so important. We have had, and we're not emphasizing it as much this year, but in past years, we had a big emphasis on pastors doing sermons on nonviolence during the month of October. And that's something we're going to get back to. We need the pastors to preach right from the front of the church and to use the Bible and talk about all of the scriptures that are there about peace and love and getting along. And I believe it's possible. It's just the people have to come together. Because our country was established with violence, and because we know that the violence was built into the very oppression of the enslaved population of our ancestors, it's still with us. It has to be redone. And so the fact that people would go in and become police officers and slave catchers and wardens in prison, a lot of the people who do that have their parents did it, their grandfather did it, their grandfather did it before them, the firemen. These guys are often the descendants of the indentured population that was brought here to control our ancestors. But a lot of them don't know it. So we have to educate the larger country to say, you've been used. You were used by the plantation owner. Your ancestors were used by the elite class to become violent and to become oppressive and to build prisons and make money off of prisons. We have to turn all that around. And it has to happen with us, not only within the Black community, but in partnership with other communities as well.
But one of the other things in response to your question is with, for example, the South Bureau Ministerial Alliance with Pastor Oliver Bowie and Reverend James Jones, I sit on their board. And so what they started to do around peace was to offer conflict resolution and these skills, how to manage conflict, how to communicate. So we would offer the training to the community. Whoever wanted to take it, whoever who was interested would come and take the course. Mm-hmm. They've also created opportunities to work with youth to teach them those skills. But the first place we had to start with the pastors to say, these are conflict resolution skills. Yes, you use them throughout the course of your day,
right?
But there's a process. So let's go through the process to see if you're familiar with the process. And they all were. Most people have these skills, have used these skills, but they don't understand that there's a process, a step that you follow that will give you a more productive end.
Right, right. Wow.
Absolutely. And Reverend Bowie in particular is one of the leaders in the group, and he's reaching out to young people. We're working with some of the young leaders here in Washington. And you're absolutely right, Dr. Valree. They are so strategic. And you are strategic, Reverend Flint, just even having this conversation today. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you so very much. I think although, nonviolence is it's a known issue and an ongoing issue, but I think like many other things, we sweep it under the rug, violence anyway, we sweep it under the rug every single day. We sweep under the rug peace circles. We sweep under the rug mediation. We sweep all these things under the rug because for lack of a better term, we're just so busy in our lives. And we get so focused on what we're doing every day that we don't take the time to actually look into something such as this. Now, I know we've spent the majority of the conversation on violence and nonviolence, but I know that there are other areas in which you focus your organization. And one of them, I want to quote the flyer. It says, join us to promote peace, conflict resolution, voting, and nonviolence. So I kind of want to jump into voting at the time that we have left, if that's all right with you ladies, because Lord knows that we could use some mediation in DC down at the state capitol, the U.S. Capitol, and sometimes in the White House. How much focus or emphasis are you able to give into the voting area?
Well, that's a real priority for us. And we have the John Lewis Voting Rights Pledge. Mm-hmm. And we are working, and we must work on this harder. What we want to do is to get 1 million people to pledge that they are going to vote in the next 2024 general election.
Yes.
And we really need to get people to sign the John Lewis Pledge, put it up on their refrigerator, wherever it is, and promise that they are going to advocate on behalf of voting. Democracy is so critical, and we have people right now undermining it, trying to take the voting rights away from people in the South in particular, and in other parts of the country. And it's very disturbing to hear the young people, because I was on a panel recently and I was listening to some young men express their views, and they were saying they weren't going to vote at all. Mm-hmm. They were just upset. They didn't see a reason why they should. So we really have to be willing, and these young men are smart. One of them was an entrepreneur, and he was in his mid 30s, and I was just shocked. And so they have reached this sort of point where they feel, oh, it doesn't make a difference. I'm going to be in business for myself, and voting's not going to matter. Oh, come on. So we really have to focus on voting as a top priority. And it certainly is for our organization. And we want to partner with people who are willing to make that a first priority for what they're doing. And it can be nonpartisan. We're not telling people how to vote, just to be sure that they are registered and dedicated to voting. If they want to be an independent, fine. If they want to be a Democrat, fine. If a Republican, that's fine. I've been on both sides of the fence personally.
So
you have the right to choose what you want to do.
Dr. Valree, I wanted to ask, with peace circles or circles of peace, has the government in your local towns or the municipalities, I should say, have they ever partnered or wanted to be a part of such an event?
Are you asking government leaders themselves?
Yes, such as city council or county officials. Have you partnered with them on the community level?
Just once.
Okay.
Once.
And I ask that question because I sometimes wonder, kind of dealing with the voting part, if we're honest, a lot of times we only see elected officials when it's time to come out and vote for them again. But I just wonder, how much do they pay attention to such an event? Because in truth, as I kind of mentioned, there's a lot of conflict resolution that needs to take place in our government, whether it be in our local municipalities and as far as to our nation, and to Dr. Meyer's point about world peace on a global level. And I just wondered how much participation, if any, have you gotten from the local municipalities?
Well, in Los Angeles, which is my home, we've used, peace circle conversations with some of our leaders. We have what's called but it's LA County Ministerial Alliance, where you bring in various leaders and you talk about issues around the community. Peace is one, finances is another. And it's really difficult for adults to understand that when you're in this circle, the power is shared. So when, for example, if Dr. Myers is speaking, everybody else is listening. That's part of the agreement, to let Dr. Myers say what she needs to say, talk about her experience from her own experience, and listen. But listen with curiosity, not with judgment. And so they have to learn how to do that, because what we do when we become adults, and that's why I think Peace Circles is so powerful for youth, is as we become adults, we become jaded with all the experiences we've had. And we know to listen, we know everything. So that point of curiosity, that door is closed. That's why you're constantly having these conflicts, because I know, I've lived it, I've done it. Okay, it's hard. You can work through that, but when you have youth and we start teaching them at very young ages how to engage, how to listen from a point of curiosity, how to show respect, how to share what's important to you, how to communicate your hurt without feeling embarrassed. That's what Peace Circles is, and it starts healing. So you don't have children walking around with frustration because something happened on the way to school, or something happened at home, or something happened in the neighborhood. There's a safe place in the school for them to talk about that. It's like, you have a carbonated drink and you take the top off, and what does it do? It all just kind of fizzes out.
Correct.
But that's what the Peace Circle is supposed to do. It's supposed to be a place where all that emotion can come out and children feel safe.
When I'm driving in Atlanta traffic, Dr. Valree, I am that carbonated soda. Every single time, trying to get around Atlanta's traffic. We are almost down here to the wire, but I just wanted to add that kind of to your point, Dr. Valree. I think, and Dr. Myers, you've mentioned this as well. What happens as we become adults, again, our view is jaded. But more often than never, we are listening to respond rather than listening to comprehend, to understand what someone else is saying. It's like playing double dutch. We're all just kind of waiting to jump into the rope in order for our voices to be heard. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get this information out. Dr. Myers, Dr. Valree, Dr. Myers, can you kind of give us, if you can, a rundown of the events that are going to take place here in the month of October, in the month of October? I know that you've given us your website and all of those things, but if there are some things that you'd like to highlight as well, Dr. Valree, if you have some events that you'd like to highlight, please go ahead at this time. Okay,
well, thank you. Well, October 2nd online, we will have this global Building a Culture of Peace. And people can look at the website to get the web link to be able to participate in that. We would love to have at least 100 people or more in this conversation. So we invite people to get past their neighborhood and realize there's a whole world out here and we need to communicate. So that's going to be October 2nd, Monday at 3 p.m., which is also the United Nations Day the International Day of Nonviolence, and it's the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. So we're going to be honoring him as a part of that as well. On October 17th, there will be a webinar on domestic violence, and people can sign up for that. And that's going to be managed by the National Association of Black Nurses. So they're going to be talking about domestic violence and how that whole issue comes to a head, and how people have to understand that. In Washington, D.C., at one of the local schools, Archbishop Carroll High School, they'll be having youth summits in some of their classrooms. And they'll be following the model that Dr. Valree has developed over the past couple of years. And so this is where local schools will be able to have discussions in the classroom with the students. We have in Pittsburgh, they have a project called Just Discipline. Now that's going to be in the city of Pittsburgh, but I'd love to get 20 other cities that would have 10 schools per city having peace circles. Would be so awesome, because it would start a movement. And that's what we really, really need to do. So we just have these events that are developing. People can go onto the website and sign up. Many of them will be virtual, because just like the Zoom technology has connected us all, they are all going to be either face-to-face or virtual. And we invite everyone to participate. They're also welcome to join Black Women for Positive Change. Men and women can sign up and then be a part of this next year if someone has creative ideas. Fantastic.
Dr. Valree, any events that you want to highlight?
Dr. Myers covered peace circles, but the one thing I'd like to say is, we really want to create these spaces for the youth. Let this be the beginning. Yes. Let this be the foundation of teaching our youth how to be able to communicate pain, hurt, how to talk about those things that are very difficult, how to share, but also how to manage conflict. That's what we want to use these peace circles for, because that's where the healing begins. And our children, this generation, they have seen so much. They have experienced much more than I ever experienced growing up, or even my children. And so you have to wonder, where can they go to have that place to say, I saw this or I experienced this and it hurts me. Even if they don't say anything and they just shed a tear, it's a release. So we would like to see, peace circles in all 50 states. Right now we have 62 circles. We have 7 countries, and we only have 24 states. So, we have a few more to go. So everybody listening out there, we want you to sign up.
Yes. As we were talking, something that came to mind, I have 3 children. I have 2 daughters and 1 son. My oldest daughter will be 21 on the 23rd. I'm just 29. I don't know how she got to be 21. Happened. But as I listen to them, as they're communicating with me now, and my oldest daughter and I talk all the time. My middle child is my 19-year-old daughter. She talks when she feels like it, and my son just whatever's on his mind. He's the baby. But it was recently that I discovered that, and I probably knew this, but it was never brought to my attention in this manner. And we've kind of touched around this in this conversation. But each of them experienced life differently growing up with us. In my thought process as a parent, I was raising them the exact same, but something was brought to my attention. The oldest child doesn't live the life that the middle child does, and the middle child doesn't live the life that the youngest child does, and vice versa on all of them. So their perspectives of what was transpiring as children and now as adults is completely different from what I had assumed was the case. And sometimes they're telling me stuff and I'm like, when did this happen? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember this, but this is their perspective of things. So Dr. Valree, what you're talking about, the focus of youth, is just amazing to me. Now, they've never, told me any stories about anything that just was so traumatic, but some of the things affected them in ways that I never even knew, and which caused me to have more candid conversations with them about certain things that I didn't even assume that they even recognize or knew. So it's amazing to me.
Well, we had a session on that 2 weeks ago. Sal Corbin, who is one of our good brothers, did an excellent session on parenting. and the need to have those honest, difficult conversations.
Yes.
He talked about how he and his daughter, she was raised cross country from him, so they weren't together. And when they did get together, how he had to engage in these really, really tough conversations.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
he said that now they're very close, but it was a process. So the role of parenting, parents have to be trained in how to become better parents.
Yeah, listen.
And that's okay. That doesn't put a bad light on you or anyone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. There, you know, as many books have been written, there's no book that can truly tell you about how to be a parent. It is truly OJT, on the job training. You figure this out every single day. Well, ladies, I can't say thank you enough for the work that you're doing in your respective areas. I can't say thank you enough for what you're trying to do, not only for your areas, but for the country and the world as a whole. There are not enough people who are actively engaging in trying to create world peace, trying to open the voices of our children, of our youth, trying to make everything, as one of my colleagues used to say, copacetic, trying to make everything work for our good, because the only way that we could ensure that we as a people, as the human race, can improve upon ourselves is if we improve upon ourselves. And what you all are doing is just so very fantastic. Any famous last words you'd like to have before we close out?
I'd just like to say, I know Black Women for Positive Change, as well as Kim Best, she's not here, she's my other co-chair. The goal is to leave this world. When we leave this world, we leave this world violent-free for our next generation. That's the goal.
Wow. I love that.
I can't beat that. I can't top that. We just like to thank you, thank Penny Rogers, thank WCEG Network Television for the work that you're doing, and we appreciate being a part of that. And we hope that you'll, continue on during the month of October, and where you can, help address this issue, and let's get the word out.
Ladies, thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just been live here on WCEG Network Television, where we again bring about the best positive change, the best broadcasting, the best information that you can ever find anywhere. You've been here on the People's Choice with your host, Joe Flint, all one word, like a tribe called Quest. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening, and have a wonderful night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.